"Daddy, please don't leave me. Not today. Not like this." Those were the last words Scarlett Hayes sobbed into her father's chest as he took his final breath in that cold hospital room, her tangled red-brown hair falling across his pale face, her green eyes swollen from 48 hours without sleep. But she couldn't believe her eyes when barely 24 hours after her father's death, 24 hours after she buried the only person who ever truly loved her, her husband Derek was standing at the courthouse signing a marriage license with his mistress Jessica Blake, the woman with the platinum blonde hair and cold gray eyes who had whispered, "Finally, the old man is gone," when her father's heart monitor flatlined. Scarlett stood there 7 months pregnant with a baby who would never meet her grandfather, clutching her father's worn janitor jacket that still smelled like Irish Spring soap and coffee and love, watching through tears as her golden-haired husband in his expensive gray suit married his mistress while the grave dirt from placing yellow roses on her father's casket that very morning was still caked beneath her fingernails. But what shattered Scarlett's heart into pieces so small she could barely breathe wasn't just watching her husband marry his mistress 24 hours after her father's death. It was the envelope trembling in her hands. The envelope her dying father had pressed into her palm with his last ounce of strength, his once sharp green eyes now clouded but still fierce, whispering, "My darling girl, when I'm gone, open this and remember, you are never alone, you are never poor, you are never powerless." I made sure of that. What Derek didn't know, as he kissed his mistress's lips, instead of comforting his pregnant, grieving wife. What Jessica didn't know as she smiled in triumph over the broken woman still wearing funeral black with a scar on her arm from when Derek pushed her through a glass door, was that Scarlett's father, the humble janitor who mopped floors at PS 234 Brooklyn for 30 years, who worked Christmas shifts so Scarlett could have presents, who ate ramen noodles for dinner so his daughter could have dance lessons, wasn't just a janitor. He was William the Ghost Moreno, the most legendary cleaner in the criminal underworld, who had made bodies disappear and evidence vanish for the most powerful mafia families in America, who had walked away from that life 20 years ago to raise his daughter in peace, who had invested his service fees into a fortune worth $3 billion, all protected in an irrevocable trust that Derek could never touch. And there was something else Derek didn't know. 20 years ago, William had saved the life of a 16-year-old boy and his father during a bloody mafia purge. That boy had grown into the most feared man in New York, the devil of Manhattan himself, Gabriel Moretti, who had been searching for William for 2 decades to repay his debt. And now, standing in the shadows of that hospital room watching William take his last breath, Gabriel had made a promise to the dying man, to protect his daughter with his own life, no matter what it took. In exactly 2 hours and 47 minutes, when Scarlett's hands finally stopped shaking enough to open that will and inherit $3 billion, when she learned that the most dangerous mafia boss in New York had sworn to be her guardian, Jessica Blake would let out a scream so raw, so full of horror and realization, that it would echo through that parking garage like a wounded animal. "Oh my God, Derek, you left a billionaire. You divorced a billionaire for me. And she has Gabriel Moretti protecting her. What have we done? What have we done?" If this story moved you, smash that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear that karma always finds its way. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story like this. Because what happens next will prove that sometimes the people who abandon you are doing you the biggest favor of your life. The echo of Jessica's scream was still ringing in Scarlett's ears when she stepped into First National Bank in Manhattan. Her legs were trembling so badly that she had to steady herself against the wall. The envelope her father had left was now soaked with sweat from her palm. The bank clerk led her down into the basement, through long, cold corridors washed in pale fluorescent light, until they stopped in front of vault room number 1247. When the heavy steel door closed behind her and she stood alone in the small room with the safe in front of her, only then did Scarlett dare to open the envelope with hands that were still shaking. Inside was a handwritten letter in blue ink, her father's familiar handwriting yet more unsteady than usual, and a small flash drive taped beside it. She began to read, and every single word felt like a blade carving into her heart. "My beloved daughter, if you are reading this letter, then I am already gone and you are standing alone in this room with millions of questions in your mind. I owe you an explanation, a truth I have hidden from you for 26 years. My real name is not William Hayes. I am William Moreno. They called me the ghost of the underworld." Scarlett had to read that line 3 times before her mind could process its meaning. Her father, the gentle man who had mopped the floors of an elementary school for 30 years, who had taught her how to tie her shoes and ride a bicycle, who had cried when she graduated from high school, was a mafia assassin. "I made things disappear that people wanted erased," he wrote. "Bodies, evidence, witnesses. I was so good at it they called me a ghost because I left no trace. But 20 years ago, I met your mother at a charity event and I knew I had to change. I walked away from everything, changed my name, became an ordinary janitor, and raised you without any connection to that world. The fees from those years I invested carefully over 2 decades. The total estate is $3 billion, all held in a trust that only you can access. Derek cannot touch a single cent no matter what he does. Scarlett's tears fell onto the page, blurring some of the words, but she kept reading. I know Derek will leave you. I have seen the way he looks at you like a burden ever since you became pregnant and I fell ill. 3 weeks ago, he came to visit me in the hospital and asked about life insurance, asked who would pay for things after I died. I knew in that moment he would betray you. But you are not alone, my daughter. I have arranged for someone to protect you. His name is Gabriel Moretti, and he owes me a life. Just as Scarlett reached the final line, the vault door opened, and a man stepped inside. She looked up with her heart pounding, and saw a tall man with jet black hair, cold steel gray eyes, and a faint scar running along his left jaw. He wore a black 3-piece suit, so expensive she could almost feel the power radiating from every stitch. She backed away until her shoulders touched the wall, her hands instinctively shielding her 7-month pregnant belly. You are Scarlett Hayes, the man said, his voice low and even as if he were speaking about the weather rather than standing before a woman too frightened to breathe. I am Gabriel Moretti. Your father saved my life and my father's life 20 years ago. Now I am here to keep my promise. Scarlett wanted to scream, to call for security, to run from this room and from all this madness. But her legs would not move and her voice was trapped in her throat. Gabriel did not step closer, seeming to understand that any movement would only frighten her more. Instead, he took a phone from his pocket and set it on the table. Your father sent me this before he died, he said. You should watch it. Scarlett stared at the phone as if it were a bomb, but curiosity finally overcame fear. She pressed play and her father's face appeared on the screen, thin and pale in a hospital bed, yet his green eyes still bright and fierce. Gabriel, her father said weakly but clearly, my daughter is living in hell. Her husband beats her. I know it, even though she tries to hide the bruises from me. I am dying and I can no longer protect her. You owe me a life. Now I am collecting that debt. Protect my daughter as you would your own life. Pull her out of that hell. The video ended and Scarlett stood there with tears streaming down her face as the entire world she knew collapsed and rebuilt itself within minutes. Her father knew. Her father had known everything. About Derek, about the beatings, about the betrayal that was coming. And he had prepared. He had arranged. He had protected her even after he was gone. She lifted her eyes to Gabriel Moretti, the most feared mafia lord in New York, the man the city called the Devil of Manhattan. And for the first time since her father closed his eyes, she felt a small, fragile spark of hope flicker in the darkness. Gabriel didn't say another word as he led Scarlett out of the bank. He only walked beside her at a distance close enough that she didn't feel threatened, but near enough that she knew he wouldn't disappear. A sleek black Bentley was waiting outside, and the driver opened the door for them without asking a single question. I need to get my things, Scarlett finally said, her voice hoarse after hours of crying. My apartment is in Queens. Gabriel nodded to the driver, and the car rolled silently through the streets of Manhattan and toward Queens. During the drive, Scarlett stared out the window, trying to process everything that had happened in the past 24 hours. Her father's death, her husband's betrayal, the discovery that her father had been a legendary cleaner of the underworld, the inheritance of $3 billion, and now sitting in a car with the most feared mafia boss in New York. When the car stopped in front of the aging apartment building where she and Derek had lived for 4 years of marriage, Scarlett stepped out with the fragile hope that at least she could collect a few clothes and her father's keepsakes. But when she opened the apartment door, her heart dropped into the abyss. The place was completely empty. No furniture, no bed, no cabinets, nothing but cold white walls and dusty wooden floors. Her clothes were dumped in piles on the floor like trash and everything of value was gone. On the opposite wall, a piece of paper was taped up in Derek's familiar sloppy handwriting. The lease is in my name. Get out in 24 hours or I'll call the police. We're over. Don't contact me again. Scarlett stood there staring at the paper and suddenly her legs could no longer hold her. She collapsed onto the cold floor, her knees striking the hard wood, and she began to cry. Not a soft, quiet cry, but the raw sobbing of someone who had lost everything. Her father was dead. Her husband had betrayed her. And now she had nowhere to go, no one to rely on. Nothing but her 7-month pregnant belly and a pile of clothes on the floor. She didn't know when Gabriel had entered the room, only that when she looked up through her tears, he was standing there, his face cold but his jaw clenched so tightly she could see the muscle twitch beneath the skin. He looked at the paper on the wall, then at the clothes on the floor, then at her kneeling and crying in the empty room. and his gray eyes darkened in a way that made Scarlett shiver. "You'll stay with me," Gabriel said, his voice not an offer but a statement. "Until everything is settled." Scarlett shook her head and tried to stand on trembling legs. "I don't need pity. I don't know you. I don't need help from the Mafia." Gabriel stepped closer, and for the first time he knelt down at her eye level, his gray eyes meeting her red-rimmed green ones. "This isn't pity," he said slowly, each word deliberate as if he wanted her to remember them forever. "This is repayment. Your father saved my life when I was 16. He saved my father's life. Without him, I'd be dead in a Brooklyn landfill with a bullet in my head. I owe him everything I have today, and I swore to him on his hospital bed that I'd protect you and the baby with my own life. That's a vow I'll keep until I die." Scarlett looked into his eyes, searching for deceit, for manipulation, for any sign this was a game, but she saw only cold seriousness and something deeper, like the pain of someone who had once lost everything and understood what that felt like. An hour later, the Bentley stopped in front of a mansion on Long Island, and Scarlett stepped out with wide, astonished eyes. A wrought iron gate with roaring lions, a white gravel driveway winding through a vast rose garden, and a 3-story Tuscan-style villa standing under the sunset light. Crystal chandeliers shimmered through the tall windows, and guards in black suits stood at every corner like silent statues. It was an entirely different world, a world Scarlett had never known, and she wasn't sure she belonged in it. But that night, as she lay on the softest bed she'd ever touched, in a room as large as her entire old apartment, for the first time in 4 years, Scarlett slept without fear. Without fear of Derek's heavy footsteps in the hallway. Without fear of the door bursting open in the night. Without fear of fists, of shouting, of long nights curled in the corner. She slept and dreamed of her father smiling and whispering that she was safe now. My daughter. She was safe now. 2 weeks passed in the Moretti estate like a strange dream Scarlett wasn't sure she wanted to wake from. Rosa, the middle-aged Italian housekeeper with warm eyes and a gentle smile, cared for her as if she were her own daughter, cooking nourishing meals for her and reminding her to rest whenever she tried to do anything at all. Gabriel kept his distance, appearing at breakfast and dinner but rarely speaking beyond brief questions about her health and the baby. But Scarlett knew he was always watching, always making sure she was safe, because every time she looked out the window at night, she saw the glow of his cigar in the rose garden. Then Harold Morrison arrived with an invitation Scarlett couldn't refuse. He was her father's lawyer, a silver-haired man with gold-rimmed glasses, a gentleman's manner, and a low Scottish lilt in his voice. According to William's will, Harold said as he sat across from Scarlett, in the mansion's sitting room, her father had planned a charity gala at the Plaza Hotel to announce the creation of the William Hayes Foundation. She was the sole heir and the host of the evening. It was time the world knew who she was. Scarlett wanted to refuse, wanted to hide in this mansion forever and never face anyone again. But when she looked into Harold's eyes, she saw her father's expectations there, and she knew she couldn't run anymore. On the night of the gala, the Plaza Hotel glowed like a palace, crystal chandeliers casting warm golden light over hundreds of guests in elegant evening wear. Scarlett entered in an emerald green gown Rosa had chosen for her, her auburn hair neatly pinned up, her 8-month pregnant belly rounding beneath the soft fabric. She was beautiful in an unusual way. Not the dazzling beauty of the women around her, but the beauty of resilience, of someone who had walked through hell and was still standing. Gabriel stood in the shadows of the room, his gray eyes never leaving her, like a guardian angel in the dark. Then Scarlett saw them. Derek, in an expensive black suit, blonde hair perfectly combed, laughing with a group of businessmen as if he were the most important man in the room. Jessica beside him, platinum blonde hair shimmering under the lights, a red dress like blood, a wedding ring on her finger so large it looked absurd. They didn't know Scarlett was the host of the event. They thought they were simply attending another charity function to expand their social circle. Harold stepped onto the stage, and the room gradually fell silent. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice echoed through the microphone, "tonight we are here to honor an extraordinary man. William Hayes, whom many of us knew as the humble janitor at PS 234 Elementary School in Brooklyn, was in truth an anonymous philanthropist who quietly donated more than $50 million to social causes over the past 20 years. A murmur swept through the room. Derek and Jessica exchanged confused looks. "And today," Harold continued, "I have the honor of announcing that William Hayes' sole heir, his daughter, Miss Scarlett Hayes, will take over the foundation bearing her father's name, with a total endowment of $3 billion. The room of 500 people fell into absolute silence. Derek dropped his glass of Dom Perignon champagne, the golden liquid spreading across the marble floor. Jessica's face turned corpse white, her gray eyes so wide they looked as if they might fall from their sockets. And Scarlett stood beneath the spotlight, head high and belly forward, feeling for the first time in her life the power of truth. Derek snapped out of his shock and began pushing through the crowd, his blue eyes wild. "My love," he called, his voice high and urgent. "I can explain. We can talk. This is all a misunderstanding." But before Derek could reach Scarlett, a tall figure stepped out of the shadows, blocking him like a wall of steel. Gabriel Moretti stood there, nearly half a head taller than Derek, his icy gray eyes looking down at the man who had once abused the woman he had sworn to protect. "She's not your wife anymore," Gabriel said, his voice low and even but carrying a clear threat, "and you'll never come near her again." Derek recognized who Gabriel was. Everyone in New York's business world knew the Devil of Manhattan, and his face drained of color. Jessica rushed forward, her shrill voice tearing through the refined air of the gala. "She's insane. She doesn't deserve that money. It's dirty money. How does a janitor have $3 billion? This is fraud." Security appeared, polite but firm, escorting Derek and Jessica out. Jessica kept screaming, her heels slipping on the marble as she was dragged away, her platinum hair now loose and wild like a mad witch's. And once again her scream echoed through the underground parking garage, the sound of total collapse. "You left a billionaire. You divorced a billionaire for me. And now she has Gabriel Moretti protecting her. We'll never touch a single cent of hers. Derek, you've ruined my life." Scarlett stood by the window looking down into the garage, watching Jessica collapse in tears and Derek stand helpless beside her. And for the first time since her father died, she felt something other than pain. Justice. 3 weeks after the charity gala, Scarlett began to think that perhaps her life was finally moving toward something peaceful. She spent most of her time in the Moretti Estate Library, reading and planning the foundation that bore her father's name, while the baby in her belly grew larger and kicked at night as if speaking to her. Gabriel kept his distance, but she could feel his presence everywhere, in the carefully prepared meals, in the new books that appeared on the shelves she had once mentioned, in the watchful eyes of the guards who made sure she was never alone. But she was wrong to think Derek would let her go. That afternoon, while Gabriel was in Manhattan at a meeting and most of the guards were with him, Derek appeared. He had bribed a new guard named Anthony, who opened the gate for him in exchange for $50,000 in cash. Scarlett was sitting in the living room reading when the door burst open and Derek walked in, blonde hair disheveled, blue eyes bloodshot as if he hadn't slept in days, his breath heavy with the smell of whiskey. "You think you can take all the money and leave me?" Derek snarled, staggering toward her. "You think you can turn me into a joke in front of the whole city and hide behind that mafia bastard? You belong to me, Scarlett. You and that child belong to me." Scarlett stood up, trying to back toward the rear door, but her 8-month pregnant belly made her slow and awkward. Derek was faster. He grabbed her arm, his nails digging into her flesh, and twisted her around to face him. The stench of alcohol on his breath made her nauseous. "You'll sign the papers transferring control of the trust to me," Derek hissed. Spittle sprang onto her face. "Or I'll make sure that child never sees the sunlight." Scarlett spat in his face. 4 years of silent endurance. 4 years of fear and pain. But today she wasn't that woman anymore. Today she was the daughter of William the Ghost Moreno, and she wouldn't bow to the man who had betrayed her. Derek roared in drunken rage and shoved her backward with all his strength. Scarlett fell, trying to turn to protect her belly, but she couldn't in time. Her side slammed into the corner of the oak table with a dry crack, and pain tore through her body like lightning. She hit the floor, and when she looked down, her white dress was already darkening with blood flowing between her legs. The door flew open, and Vincent Russo rushed in. A man built like a bear with a thick beard and eyes blazing with fury. One punch and Derek went down unconscious, blood spilling from his nose and mouth. But Vincent didn't care about him anymore. He dropped to his knees beside Scarlett, his face going pale as he saw the pool of blood spreading beneath her. "Call the helicopter," Vincent shouted into his radio. "Now, and call the boss. Tell him Miss Hayes is bleeding." Gabriel got the call while he was in Manhattan, and by every account, it was the first time anyone had ever seen the Devil of Manhattan lose control. He flipped the conference table, shoved 2 men out of his way, and stormed out of the building like a madman. He drove through the city at nearly suicidal speed, running red lights, mounting sidewalks, and reached Mount Sinai Hospital only 15 minutes after the helicopter landed. When he burst into the emergency room, shirt rumpled, black hair wild, gray eyes feral, the nurses thought he was dangerous and almost called security. But then the chief physician recognized him, because everyone in New York's medical world knew Gabriel Moretti, the man who had donated millions of dollars to the city's hospitals. "She's in surgery," the doctor said tensely. "She delivered prematurely at 34 weeks. The baby is weak but fighting. We're doing everything we can." Gabriel stood there in the bright hospital corridor, and for the first time in his life, the most feared mafia lord in New York didn't know what to do. He couldn't threaten death. He couldn't bribe fate. He could only stand and wait. His hands clenched so tightly, his nails cut into his palms and drew blood he didn't even notice. 3 hours later, the doctor came out with news. A girl, weighing 2.5 kilograms, weak but alive. The mother lost a lot of blood, but she's out of danger. Gabriel said nothing, only nodded once and walked to the NICU window. Inside, a tiny life lay in an incubator, skin red and fragile, covered in wires and tubes, but a miniature hand was clenched as if fighting the entire world. And Gabriel stood there all night, not eating, not sleeping, not leaving even for a moment. When Scarlett woke the next morning and was wheeled to the NICU to meet her daughter for the first time, she saw Gabriel still standing there through the glass, stubble on his jaw, eyes red from lack of sleep, but he hadn't moved. She named her daughter Lily, after William's mother, the grandmother she had never met, and when she looked up, her green eyes met Gabriel's gray through the glass. And in that moment she saw something she had never seen in him before. Not the coldness of a mafia lord, not the duty of a debt repaid, but something deeper, warmer, something she didn't dare name for fear it would vanish if she did. A month had passed since that horrifying night, and Lily was strong enough to leave the incubator and return to the Moretti estate with her mother. Scarlett spent every moment with her daughter, learning how to change diapers, learning how to feed her, learning how to soothe her when she cried in the middle of the night, and with each passing day she loved the tiny being more. Gabriel still kept his distance, but Scarlett noticed that he often stood outside the nursery door at night, listening to Lily's steady breathing as if guarding her sleep. As for Derek, after Vincent's punch broke his nose and knocked him unconscious, he was taken to the hospital and then released because Scarlett refused to press charges. She didn't want to extend his presence in her life by even a single day, but she underestimated Derek's greed and resentment. One Monday morning, just after Scarlett had finished feeding Lily, Harold Morrison arrived at the estate with a face dark as a coming storm. "Derek has filed for custody," he said, setting a thick folder on the table. "He hired lawyers from one of the most expensive firms in Manhattan, and he has Jessica Blake as a witness." Scarlett felt her blood turn to ice. "What reason is Derek giving?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her effort to stay calm. Harold read from the file, each word like a blade. "He claims you're mentally unstable, with a history of depression and self-harm. He says you're living with a notorious organized crime figure, an unsafe environment for a child. He says you've deliberately isolated the baby from her biological father and invented abuse stories to smear him. And Jessica is willing to testify that you attacked her violently at the hospital when your father died." Scarlett wanted to scream, to smash something, to run to wherever Derek was and show him what real madness looked like. But she didn't. She looked down at Lily, sleeping peacefully in her crib, the tiny face with soft black hair and rosy skin, and she knew she had to be strong for her daughter. "Did my father prepare anything for this situation?" Scarlett asked Harold, remembering the first letter and its promise that she'd never be alone. Harold smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Your father prepared for everything," he said, taking an old yellow envelope from his briefcase. "He left this letter labeled, 'If Derek sues you, open envelope number 2. Scarlett opened it with trembling hands, and inside was a handwritten letter and a small flash drive. William's letter read, "My beloved daughter, if you're reading this, it means your terrible husband has decided to fight dirty. I knew this would happen. I saw his nature long ago, but you didn't listen to me. Now you have to fight, and I'm giving you weapons. 3 weeks before I died, Derek came to visit me in the hospital. He thought I was asleep, but I was awake, and I recorded the entire conversation. Listen to this flash drive, and you'll understand what kind of man your husband really is. And don't worry, I prepared much more." Harold took out a laptop and plugged in the drive. The room fell silent as Derek's voice came through the speakers, clear and cold. "How much is your life insurance? Who does that money go to? Be honest. Raising Scarlett with a baby on the way is expensive. She doesn't earn anything. She just sits at home crying because you're dying." William's voice answered, weak but sharp. "You want my money. Not want. Need," Derek replied. "My wife is useless. She's gotten fat from pregnancy. She does nothing but complain all day. If you die, who's going to take care of my life? I sacrificed 4 years with her. I deserve compensation." Scarlett sat motionless, tears running down her face, listening to the man she once loved call her useless, a burden, something to be compensated for. And she remembered the 4 years of beatings, of insults, of nights curled in a corner wondering what she had done wrong. She had done nothing wrong. She had only loved the wrong man. Harold placed another file on the table. "And this is the rest of what your father left," he said. "The investigation report from the private detective William hired. Your medical records from 5 different hospitals over 4 years, all documenting injuries described as accidents but clearly caused by abuse. X-rays of broken ribs, photos of bruises on your body, photos of the scar on your arm from the time Derek shoved you through a glass door, and the record of Jessica Blake, who has married and divorced twice, both times stripping her former husbands of their assets. Your father knew everything," Harold said gently. "He prepared everything. He protected you even after he was gone." Scarlett clutched the files to her chest, and for the first time since she learned Derek was suing her, she didn't feel afraid. Her father had given her weapons. Now it was her turn to fight. While Scarlett was preparing for the legal battle with the evidence her father had left behind, Gabriel Moretti decided to open another front. No one knew where he went that afternoon, only that the black Bentley left the estate at 2 o'clock and headed toward Manhattan with 2 guards in the back seat. Derek's law firm was on the 35th floor of a glass tower in Midtown, where the wealthy and powerful hired the sharpest minds to protect their interests at any cost. Jennifer Walsh, Derek's lead attorney, was a woman in her 50s with eyes as sharp as knives and a reputation for devouring opponents alive in the courtroom. She was reviewing the case file when her office door burst open without a knock, and Gabriel Moretti walked in as if he owned the building. "Where is my assistant?" Jennifer shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger. "You have no right to barge in here like this." "Who are you?" Gabriel didn't answer. He walked to the chair opposite her desk, sat down as if it were his living room, and placed a black leather folder on the polished oak surface. Jennifer looked at the folder, then at Gabriel, and something in the cold gray of his eyes stopped her from calling security. Instead, she slowly sat back down, her hand slightly trembling as she reached for the folder and opened it. Inside were documents Gabriel had spent 2 weeks gathering, using every resource in his underworld network. Financial records showing that Derek Lawson had embezzled $500,000 from the real estate firm where he worked over the past 3 years. Tax filings proving he had committed fraud and evaded taxes for at least 3 consecutive years. And a photograph of Derek shaking hands with Tony Castellano, a notorious loan shark in Chinatown that even the police were reluctant to touch. Jennifer Walsh's face strained from red to white as she turned each page. "What is this?" she asked, her voice no longer aggressive. "This is the truth about your client," Gabriel replied, his tone calm and even as if discussing the weather. "Embezzlement, tax fraud, borrowing from organized crime. Any one of these is enough to put him in prison for years. All 3 together and he'll grow old before he ever sees daylight as a free man." Jennifer closed the folder, trying to regain control. "Are you threatening me?" she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "This evidence is illegal. You can't use it in court." "I don't need court," Gabriel said with a smile that never reached his icy gray eyes. "I only need 1 call to the FBI and another to the IRS. They'll find their own evidence, and I promise they'll be very interested in what they uncover. As for the photo with Tony Castellano, I think the front page of the New York Times would enjoy a story about a husband suing his wife for custody while owing money to criminals." "You don't have the right," Jennifer began. But Gabriel had already stood, leaning toward her with a presence that made even a seasoned lawyer shrink back in her chair. "Tell your client he has 48 hours to withdraw the lawsuit," Gabriel said slowly, each word clear as if carved into stone. "If not, I'll send these documents to every authority that can turn his life into hell. And Miss Walsh, this isn't a threat. This is a promise. I always keep my promises." Gabriel left the office, leaving Jennifer Walsh alone with the folder on her desk and cold sweat on her brow. She called Derek immediately, told him everything, and urged him to withdraw the case. But Derek, in the arrogance and blind rage of a man who had lost everything, refused. He didn't believe Gabriel would dare follow through. He thought it was only a bluff. He chose to go to court, and that was the greatest mistake of his life. The hearing arrived on a damp Tuesday morning in October, when heavy gray clouds hung over Manhattan like an omen of what was about to unfold in Family Courtroom B. Scarlett woke at 5 in the morning, fed Lily, dressed her in the pure white gown Rosa had prepared, then put on the simplest black dress in her own closet. She wanted the judge to see her as she truly was, a mother who had walked through hell and was still fighting to protect her child, not a billionaire heiress in extravagant clothes. Gabriel drove her to the courthouse but didn't enter the courtroom on Harold's advice, because the presence of the most notorious mafia boss in New York could harm the case. Instead, he sat in the car parked directly outside the building, gray eyes fixed on the glass doors, waiting with the patience of a hunting animal. Scarlett entered the courtroom with 3-month-old Lily in her arms, Harold Morrison beside her with 2 other lawyers from Hartwell and Associates. The room was smaller than she had imagined. with rows of old oak benches and pale yellow light from the fluorescent fixtures above. Derek was already seated at the opposite table with Jennifer Walsh, blonde hair neatly combed, expensive gray suit, face like stone but blue eyes flicking constantly toward Scarlett with something between hatred and fear. Jessica Blake sat in the back row, conservative navy dress, platinum blonde hair tied neatly, trying to look like a credible witness rather than the triumphant rival she truly was. Judge Catherine Morrison entered. A silver-haired woman in her 60s with piercing eyes and a reputation for never tolerating liars in her courtroom. She sat down, put on her glasses, and opened the session with a voice that was cold but fair. "Mr. Lawson," she said, turning to Derek. "You are seeking full custody of the child Lily Lawson Hayes on the grounds that Ms. Hayes is unfit to be a mother. Please state your reasons." Jennifer Walsh stood and began her carefully prepared argument about Scarlett's mental instability, her dangerous living environment with a notorious organized crime figure, and her isolation of the child from her biological father. The accusations flew like arrows, each one aimed at Scarlett's heart. But she sat still, back straight, eyes forward, Lily sleeping peacefully in her arms. When it was Harold's turn, he rose with the calm of a man who had fought in courtrooms for 40 years. "Your Honor," he said, his low Scottish voice filling the room, "before my client responds to these baseless accusations, I ask permission to present certain evidence regarding the true nature of Mr. Derek Lawson and the real motive behind this lawsuit." Harold signaled his assistant and a laptop was connected to the courtroom speakers. "This is a recording of a conversation between Mr. Derek Lawson and Mr. William Hayes, my client's father, recorded 3 weeks before Mr. Hayes died of cancer. This recording was made legally in the state of New York, under the one-party consent law." The room fell silent as Derek's voice emerged, clear and razor-sharp. "How much is your life insurance? Who does that money go to? Be honest, raising Scarlett with a baby on the way is expensive. She doesn't earn a cent. She just sits at home crying." William's weak voice replied, "You want my money." And then Derek continued, unaware that every word was being captured. "My wife is useless. She's gotten fat from pregnancy. She does nothing but complain all day. If you die, who's going to take care of my life? I sacrificed 4 years with her. I deserve compensation." The recording ended and the room sank into a heavy silence. Judge Morrison looked at Derek with unconcealed disgust. Jessica Blake in the back row had gone corpse white, and Derek sat there like a trapped animal, wild blue eyes darting for an escape that didn't exist. But Harold wasn't finished. "And here, Your Honor," he continued, his voice lowering with sorrow, "are my client's medical records from her 4-year marriage to Mr. Lawson. Miss Hayes was hospitalized 5 times at 5 different hospitals for injuries recorded as accidents. But when we examine the pattern more closely, it reveals a very different truth." Harold projected the X-ray images onto the screen, and Scarlett had to turn her face away because she didn't want to see those injuries again. 2 broken ribs in the year 2021, Harold read. Internal bruising in the year 2022. A long scar on the arm from a glass laceration in the year 2023. And these are photographs of the bruises on Miss Hayes' body taken by the private investigator her father hired before he died. The images appeared on the screen, bruises on her back, her arms, her shoulders, the marks of 4 years of hell Scarlett had tried to hide from the world. A murmur of outrage rippled through the room. Judge Morrison removed her glasses and looked straight at Derek with eyes that could burn steel. "Mr. Lawson," she said, her voice icy, "would you like to explain these injuries to your former wife?" Derek leapt to his feet, his chair crashing backward, his face purple with rage and panic. "She did it to herself," Derek shouted, pointing at Scarlett. "She's crazy. She hurts herself and blames me. She wants to destroy me. She wants to take all my money. It's all lies." Jennifer Walsh grabbed Derek's arm, trying to pull him back down, but he shoved her away and kept yelling like a man who had lost control. And Scarlett sat there calm, back straight, Lily still sleeping in her arms, watching the man who had once been her husband destroy himself in front of the entire courtroom. The judge slammed her gavel, the sound like a gunshot. "Silence!" she shouted. "Mr. Lawson, sit down immediately, or I will have you removed from this courtroom for contempt." Derek sat back down with his face flushed and his breathing shallow. Jennifer Walsh leaned in to whisper something into his ear with a tense expression, but Scarlett knew the real storm hadn't arrived yet. Judge Morrison took a deep breath to regain her composure, and then turned to the other side. "Miss Walsh, do you have any other witnesses?" Jennifer Walsh stood, though her confidence had already faded. "Your Honor, we call Ms. Jessica Blake to the stand." Jessica rose from the back row, trying to maintain her composure as she walked forward. She looked nothing like the triumphant woman in the red dress from the charity gala. Today she wore a conservative navy dress, light makeup, platinum blonde hair neatly tied back, trying to look like a respectable citizen rather than the woman who had stolen another's husband. After being sworn in, Jessica sat on the witness chair with a mask of calm. Jennifer Walsh began with gentle questions about Jessica's relationship with Derek, her observations of Scarlett, the times she had seen Scarlett behave erratically. Jessica answered smoothly, clearly well rehearsed, portraying Scarlett as unstable, prone to crying, with strange behavior and unfit to be a mother. Then it was Harold Morrison's turn, and Scarlett saw a small, fleeting smile cross the old man's face. "Ms. Blake," Harold began, his tone gentle as if speaking to an old friend. "You were at Mount Sinai Hospital on the night of March 12th this year, the night Mr. William Hayes died, correct?" Jessica blinked, slightly startled. "Yes," she said. "I went to support Derek emotionally. He was very distressed that his father-in-law was dying." Harold nodded, sympathy like a perfect mask. "Of course he was distressed. And you? How did you feel at the moment Mr. Hayes passed away? Did you say anything?" Jessica glanced at Derek and then shook her head. "I don't remember exactly. It was a very sad moment. I think I just stood there and prayed for him to rest in peace." "You don't remember," Harold repeated softly. "Then let me help you remember." He signaled to his assistant and the courtroom screen lit up. "This is security footage from the hallway at Mount Sinai Hospital," Harold explained. "From the night of March 12th at 11:47 p.m., exactly 2 minutes after Mr. William Hayes was pronounced dead." The video began, and the room fell silent enough to hear every breath. On the screen, the hospital hallway glowed in cold white light. Derek leaned against the wall, face blank, looking at his phone, and Jessica stood beside him, platinum blonde hair unmistakable under the lights, her lips moving. The audio from the video played through the courtroom, restored clearly by specialists Harold had hired. "Finally, the old man is gone," Jessica's voice in the video said, and then she giggled as if she'd just heard a joke. "Now, no one is stopping us anymore." She turned, linked her arm with Derek's, and they walked down the corridor with the relief of people who had shed a burden. The video stopped and the courtroom erupted. A wave of outraged murmurs surged through the room. Someone shouted "monster." Someone stood and pointed at Jessica in disgust. Jessica sat on the witness stand like a stone statue, face ghost white, lips trembling, gray eyes wide with horror. Judge Morrison struck her gavel repeatedly to restore order, but the look she gave Jessica was filled with open contempt. "Miss Blake," the judge said coldly, "you just lied under oath. You told this court you went to the hospital to support Mr. Lawson because he was grieving, but this video shows you laughing and saying 'finally the old man is gone' when a man had just taken his last breath. You should be ashamed." "I can explain," Jessica stammered, but no explanation could save her now. She had exposed her true nature in front of the entire courtroom, and nothing could erase that video. "Step down," Judge Morrison ordered, her voice icy, "and I am considering referring your case to the district attorney for perjury." Jessica stood on shaking legs, nearly falling as she descended the steps, and fled the courtroom with tears streaming down her face. The door slammed behind her, and the room sank into heavy silence. Scarlett watched Jessica disappear and felt no triumph at all, only exhaustion, only a longing for all of it to end so she could go home, hold her daughter, and sleep for a long, long time. Lily stirred in her arms, tiny green eyes opening to look at her mother. And Scarlett realized that no matter how mad the world outside became, no matter how cruel people could be, this small life was all that truly mattered. After Jessica vanished from the courtroom, Judge Morrison called for a 15-minute recess so everyone could regain their composure, though Scarlett knew the judge needed time to review the file again and prepare her final ruling. When everyone returned to their seats, the air in the courtroom felt heavy, like the calm before a storm. Derek sat alone at the defendant's table because Jennifer Walsh had left during the break, perhaps unwilling to have her name tied to a case that had become such a disaster. He sat there with his blonde hair fallen loose, his tie crooked, blue eyes red and hollow like a man who had lost everything and knew it. Judge Morrison entered, and the room rose and sat again at her signal. She placed a thick file on the bench, put on her glasses, and looked straight at Derek with an expression Scarlett would never forget. "I have been a family court judge for 23 years, Judge Morrison began, her voice echoing through the silent room. "I have seen many terrible cases, ugly divorces, bitter custody battles, people willing to do anything to destroy one another. But I must say that in all my career I have never seen anyone as greedy, cruel, and shameless as you, Mr. Derek Lawson." She paused and took a deep breath as if restraining her own anger. "You beat your wife for 4 years. You questioned your dying father-in-law about his life insurance. You married your mistress 24 hours after he died. You broke into someone else's home and pushed your pregnant ex-wife so violently that she went into premature labor. And now you stand before this court seeking custody of the child you nearly killed, not because you love her, but because you want access to her mother's fortune. The judge stood, and the fury in her voice made the entire room hold its breath. Your petition for custody is denied in full. You are forbidden from coming within 500 meters of Ms. Scarlett Hayes and the child Lily Hayes, effective immediately and indefinitely. I am also referring this entire file to the Manhattan District Attorney for criminal investigation into systematic domestic abuse, and to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Fraud Unit, based on the evidence of embezzlement and tax evasion. Derek sprang up like a cornered beast, his face flushed, veins bulging, and he shouted with all the rage and desperation of a man who had lost everything. "Scarlett," he yelled, pointing at her like a blade. "You can't do this to me. I'm your husband. I'm that child's father. I have rights. You've ruined my life." 2 court officers moved in and seized Derek's arms, but he kept shouting and struggling like a wild animal. "I won't let this go. I'll appeal to a higher court. I'll take everything back. Do you hear me, Scarlett? I'll never let you go." And then Scarlett did something she had never done in all those 4 years of hell. She stood up, back straight, head high, Lily in her arms, and looked directly into the eyes of the man who had once been her husband, with a gaze that held no fear at all. "You were never my husband," Scarlett said, her voice calm and clear in the stunned silence of the room. "You were only the abuser I once made the mistake of trusting. You were never Lily's father. You were only the nightmare I finally woke up from. And you'll never, never come near my daughter again." Derek stood there with his mouth open, unable to believe that the woman who once cowered before him was now looking at him as if he were nothing more than dirt beneath her shoe. The officers dragged him from the courtroom, and his shouting echoed down the corridor until the doors slammed shut and the room fell silent. Judge Morrison looked at Scarlett with an expression Scarlett thought might be respect. "The hearing is adjourned," she declared, striking her gavel. Scarlett walked out into the golden autumn sunlight with Lily sleeping peacefully in her arms and Gabriel waiting beside the black Bentley. He didn't say anything. He simply opened the car door for her with his familiar courtesy. But Scarlett saw the corner of his mouth lift in a rare smile. On the way back to the estate, Scarlett sat quietly staring out the car window. The streets of Manhattan sliding past like a silent film she no longer had the energy to follow. Lily was awake and drinking the bottle Rosa had prepared, her round green eyes watching her mother, as if she somehow understood that today mattered. Gabriel sat across from her, silent as always, but his gray eyes flicked toward Scarlett now and then with something she couldn't quite read. "You're stronger than I thought," Gabriel said suddenly, and Scarlett startled and turned to him. "In the courtroom today, when you stood up and faced him, you didn't tremble at all. You stood straight and told him exactly what he was. That takes a great deal of courage." Scarlett gave a tired smile, still holding Lily's bottle. "I'm not brave. I'm just pretending until it becomes real." Gabriel looked at her, and for the first time, Scarlett saw something soften in those cold gray eyes. "That's exactly what courage is," he said gently. When they arrived at the estate, Rosa ran out with tears of joy, hugging Scarlett and Lily as if they'd returned from a battlefield. After the warm dinner Rosa prepared, Scarlett took Lily upstairs to the nursery to get her ready for sleep. She was changing Lily when she heard familiar footsteps outside the door, and when she turned, Gabriel was standing in the doorway with an expression she'd never seen on the face of the most feared mafia lord in New York. "Let me hold her," Gabriel said, his voice slightly hoarse as if he were forcing himself to say something difficult. "You need to rest. You've had a long day." Scarlett looked at him in surprise. Over the past months, Gabriel had always kept his distance from Lily, watching from afar, standing outside the NICU, but never truly holding her. She nodded and gently placed Lily into Gabriel's arms. The mafia lord held the baby with hands that had pulled triggers countless times, hands used to violence now trembling slightly as they lifted a tiny life weighing less than 4 kilograms. And then Lily did something no one expected. She opened her wide green eyes, looked up at the angular face with the scar along Gabriel's jaw, and instead of crying, she reached out her tiny hand and wrapped it around his little finger. Then she smiled, a wide, toothless, innocent smile for the man all of New York feared. Gabriel froze, the lord of the Moretti Empire, a man who had killed without hesitation and built a kingdom on blood and fear, now stood utterly helpless before a 3-month-old girl holding his finger and smiling at him. Scarlett stood on the stairs watching, her heart tightening in a way she'd never felt before. She saw the gray in Gabriel's eyes glisten under the light, saw his jaw tighten as if holding back something too strong, saw his rough fingers cradle the tiny life as if it were the most precious gift in the world. That night after Lily was asleep and Scarlett had gone to rest, Gabriel sat alone in his study with a glass of whiskey he didn't drink and an envelope Harold had given him after the hearing. On it was William's handwriting, "For Gabriel, when you've begun to love my daughter." He opened it, and the letter inside made hands that never shook, when killing now tremble. "Gabriel," William wrote, "if you're reading this, it means you've begun to open your heart to my daughter and my granddaughter. I know you. I know you try to keep your distance. Tell yourself this is just a debt, just a duty. But I also know your heart isn't as cold as you think. You saved your father when you were 16. You built an empire to protect your family. You aren't the monster people say you are. You're just a boy who had to grow up too fast in a world that was too cruel. So, I have one final request. Don't just protect my daughter. Love her. She's forgotten what it feels like to be loved after 4 years with that bastard. She deserves to remember it. And so do you, Gabriel. You've been alone too long. You've kept your heart closed too long. It's time to let someone in. I'm not saying you must love my daughter the way a man loves a woman. I'm only saying open your heart. Let yourself feel. Let yourself live as a human being and not as a killing machine. If love comes, don't run from it. If happiness knocks, don't slam the door shut. You deserve happiness, Gabriel. Both you and my daughter do." And Gabriel sat there in the dark with the letter in his hand, the untouched whiskey sweating on the desk. And for the first time in 20 years since becoming a boss, he didn't know what to do with the heart beating wildly in his chest. A year had passed since that fateful hearing, and Scarlett's life had changed in ways she'd never dared to imagine. The William Hayes Foundation officially began operating with its headquarters on the 40th floor of the Moretti Tower in Manhattan, where Scarlett spent most of her time building programs to support abused women. In its first year, the foundation helped more than 5,000 women and children, providing safe shelter, free legal aid, vocational training, and psychological counseling. Scarlett went from a trembling, frightened victim to a powerful advocate, appearing on CNN, Time magazine, and even at a TED Talk to share her story and inspire other women living through similar hells. What the public didn't know was that behind the bright charitable facade, Gabriel Moretti quietly used his underworld network to protect the shelters from violent husbands and boyfriends who tried to threaten them, and those men often vanished from their victims' lives after a brief visit from Gabriel's people. Derek was sentenced to 2 years in prison for financial fraud and tax evasion, and Jessica Blake disappeared from New York after losing her job and going bankrupt. No one knew where she went, and no one cared. And Lily, Scarlett's Lily, was now 1 year old, and the greatest joy of her life. Her birthday party was held in the Moretti estate garden on a warm autumn afternoon with pink balloons, a princess cake, and about 20 close friends including Rosa, Vincent, Harold, and a few foundation staff. But what made Scarlett struggle not to laugh was Gabriel arriving with a gigantic teddy bear almost as tall as she was, snow-white fur, glossy brown eyes, and an enormous pink bow tied around its neck. "You know she can't even hug that thing," Scarlett teased, hands on her hips as she looked at Gabriel. "It's 3 times her size." Gabriel stood there, his face as calm as ever, but Scarlett saw the corner of his mouth curve slightly. "She'll grow," he said, "and the bear will still be here waiting." It was the first time they laughed together like real friends. No longer the distance between a mafia boss and the woman he protected. No longer the line between duty and affection. Lily sat on the green grass, her soft black hair tied into 2 tiny braids, her green eyes bright like her mother's and her grandfather's, her little hands reaching for the enormous bear as she giggled. And Gabriel, the feared lord of Manhattan, sat down on the grass beside her despite his expensive suit, and helped Lily hug the bear with a patience Scarlett had never seen in any man. That night, after the guests had gone and Lily was asleep in her crib, Scarlett woke to her daughter's crying through the monitor. She slipped on a robe and hurried to the nursery, but Gabriel was already there before her. He was holding Lily, walking slowly around the room and singing a lullaby in Italian, his low, warm voice filling the quiet night. Lily had stopped crying, her eyes drifting shut in the arms of the man who held her as if she were his own child. Scarlett stood in the doorway, not wanting to break the moment. When Gabriel laid Lily back in the crib and turned, he saw Scarlett there. Auburn hair loose and tangled, eyes still heavy with sleep, the thin robe not quite hiding the curve of her body. They stood together beside the crib, watching Lily sleep, and their shoulders touched in the small space. Neither of them moved away. Scarlett felt the warmth of Gabriel's body through his shirt, felt his heartbeat a little faster than usual, and she knew something was changing between them, something she didn't dare name for fear it would vanish if she did. 3 years had passed since Lily's first birthday night, and life in the Moretti estate had settled into a warm, familiar rhythm. Lily was now 4 years old, a bright little girl with softly curled black hair, green eyes just like her mother's and her grandfather's, and a smile that could melt even the most feared mafia lord in New York. She called Gabriel Dad as naturally as breathing, because in her young memory he was the only man who was always there, who held her when she cried at night, who taught her her first steps, who read her fairy tales every evening before bed. Scarlett and Gabriel still weren't officially a couple, but everyone in the estate knew there was something between them, deeper than friendship, deeper than duty. Only both of them were too afraid to name it. Then Derek's letter arrived and shattered the peace Scarlett had worked 3 years to build. Derek had been released after serving 2 years for financial fraud, granted early release for good behavior. He wrote to Scarlett from a cheap rented apartment in Queens, his handwriting shaky and his tone nothing like the arrogant Derek she had known. He asked to see his daughter, just once, to apologize, and to look at the face of the child he'd never truly been a father to. Scarlett read the letter in her study, her heart torn between reason and a mother's instinct. She hated Derek. She feared Derek. But she also knew Lily had a right to know who her biological father was. Good or bad. She consulted a child psychologist, Harold, and even Lily herself. Though Lily was only 4 and couldn't understand everything, when Scarlett told Gabriel she'd decided to allow the meeting under supervision, his reaction was more violent than anything she'd ever seen. Gabriel slammed his hand on the table, veins standing out, gray eyes blazing with a fury she hadn't seen since the night she'd been attacked. "He almost killed you and Lily," Gabriel roared, his voice filling the room. "He shoved you when you were 8 months pregnant. He caused Lily to be born early and nearly die in the incubator. And now you want to let him near her. He doesn't deserve to see Lily for even a second." Scarlett stood, stepped close to him, and did something she'd never dared before. She placed her hand on his chest, over his pounding heart, and looked straight into his blazing gray eyes. "This isn't about what he deserves," Scarlett said gently. "This is about Lily's right to know who her biological father is, good or bad. I don't want Lily to grow up one day and blame me for never giving her the chance to decide for herself." Gabriel looked down at Scarlett's hand on his chest, and the fury in his eyes slowly cooled, replaced by something like pain and fear. "If he hurts you or Lily, even one hair," Gabriel said, his voice low like a beast's growl, "I trust you to protect us," Scarlett answered without breaking his gaze. "But I also trust that I'm strong enough to protect myself now. You taught me that." The meeting was arranged in Central Park on a late autumn afternoon near the Bethesda fountain where families and children were playing. 2 of Gabriel's guards stood 10 meters away, never taking their eyes off Lily, and Gabriel himself sat on a stone bench about 20 meters away, gray eyes like steel fixed on Derek's figure. Derek appeared thinner than Scarlett remembered, blonde hair dull instead of glossy, blue eyes sunken with dark circles beneath them, cheap clothes and worn shoes. 2 years in prison, and the collapse of his luxurious life, had turned him into a very different man, at least in appearance. He approached, and when he saw Lily holding her mother's hand in a pink dress with butterflies, her softly curled black hair in 2 small braids, green eyes bright with a child's curiosity, Derek dropped to his knees, tears filling his eyes. "Hello, sweetheart," Derek said, his voice trembling. "I'm Derek. I'm your biological father." Lily tilted her head, looking at the strange man kneeling in front of her with innocent confusion. She'd never met Derek, never seen him except in old photographs Scarlett had long put away. To Lily, he was only a stranger, a thin, blonde man crying for reasons she didn't understand. "Who are you?" Lily asked softly. "Mommy says I have a biological father, but my daddy is over there." She lifted her hand and pointed toward Gabriel on the distant bench, gray eyes never leaving her. Derek followed her pointing finger and saw Gabriel Moretti watching him with eyes of ice and his face twisted in pain. It was the moment everything became clear. Derek might be Lily's biological father, but Gabriel was her real father in her heart. And Scarlett, watching her daughter point proudly toward Gabriel, realized Lily had chosen him as her father long ago, with the innocent and wise heart of a child who knows who truly loves her. 2 months after the meeting in Central Park, life in the Moretti estate returned to its familiar, peaceful rhythm. Derek was allowed to see Lily once a month under strict supervision, and although Gabriel never truly accepted it, he learned to restrain his anger for Scarlett and for Lily. But there were enemies Gabriel couldn't control. Old vendettas in the underworld that had smoldered for years, and only waited for the right moment to ignite. The Castellano family, the greatest rival of the Moretti Empire, had watched Gabriel for months, and discovered that the devil of Manhattan's only weakness was the auburn-haired woman with green eyes living in his estate. That night, Scarlett left the foundation office later than usual to finish the end-of-year financial report. She entered the elevator alone, called Rosa to say she'd be late, and asked her to feed Lily dinner. The doors had just closed when the lights went out, And before Scarlet could scream, a cloth soaked in chloroform was pressed over her mouth and nose, and the world went dark. When Scarlet woke, she realized she was tied to an iron chair in an abandoned warehouse, with air thick with oil and dust, and a weak yellow bulb swinging overhead. 3 men stood around her, and an older man with slicked-back gray hair and cold black eyes sat opposite her, looking at her like prey. "So this is the girl Gabriel Moretti would die for," the man said in a heavy Italian accent. "I'm Dominic Castellano, and you're going to help me get what I want from that bastard Moretti." Scarlet said nothing, and only met his gaze with the cold steadiness she'd learned through years of hell and survival. Dominic signaled, and the beating began, not to her face but to her body. Blows that made her clench her teeth to keep from crying out. They demanded information about Gabriel's operations, his roots, his weapons, anything that could destroy him. Scarlet knew nothing, and even if she did, she wouldn't speak. She spat blood at one of them, and he struck her so hard the chair tipped back and her head hit the concrete. "You think you can reach your Moretti through me?" Scarlet said hoarsely without trembling. "You don't know Gabriel Moretti at all." At the same time at the estate, Gabriel learned Scarlet was missing and his world collapsed. Vincent had never seen his boss like that. Gabriel overturned tables, shattered mirrors, shouted at everyone, gray eyes wild like a trapped beast. He mobilized everything, burned through half the underworld for information, threatened everyone, ready to kill anyone in his way. "Find her!" Gabriel roared at Vincent, his voice breaking. "Find her now, or I'll burn this city to the ground." Vincent tried to calm him, but Gabriel struck the wall until blood ran from his knuckles. "I can't be calm. She's out there. They're hurting her. I can't lose her." 6 hours later, a Castellano source gave them the address of a warehouse in New Jersey. Gabriel didn't wait for backup or plans. He drove through the night alone with 2 guns and a knife and went in like death itself. No one had a chance. In minutes it was over, and he found Scarlet still tied to the chair, bruised and shaking but alive. Gabriel fell to his knees, cut the ropes with trembling hands, and pulled her into his arms as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I should have protected you better. This is my fault." Scarlet lifted her bruised hand to his face, wiped the blood from his cheek, and smiled through the pain. "You came," she said softly. "You always do. That's all that matters." Gabriel took Scarlet to the Moretti family's private hospital that same night, and the doctors confirmed that she had only superficial injuries. A few bruises and a small cut on her lip. Nothing physically serious, but Gabriel didn't leave her bedside for a single second. He sat in the chair beside her all night, holding her hand as if afraid that if he let go, she would disappear again. When the first morning light filtered through the white curtains, Scarlet opened her eyes and saw Gabriel still there, stubble on his jaw from not shaving, eyes red from lack of sleep, his suit still stained with the blood of the men he'd killed the night before, but his gray eyes never leaving her. "You're still here," Scarlet whispered hoarsely. Gabriel squeezed her hand tighter, his thumb brushing gently over her knuckles, as if making sure she was real, alive, safe. "I'll always be here," he said softly. "Until you tell me to go." Silence filled the room for a long moment, with only the steady beep of the heart monitor and birdsong outside the window. And then Gabriel did what he'd wanted to do for 3 years, but had always been too afraid to do. He bowed his head until his forehead touched her hand, and the words poured out as if they'd been trapped in his chest too long. "Scarlet," he said, his voice trembling in a way the devil of Manhattan never trembled for anyone. "I don't know how to love. I don't know how to be gentle or romantic. All my life I've only known how to kill, make money, and keep the people who belong to me safe. I don't know how to say sweet things or give flowers or write poems. I'm just a criminal with blood on my hands and a heart that's been frozen for a long time." He looked up at her, gray eyes shining in the morning light. "But if you give me a chance, I'll learn. I'll learn how to love you the right way. I'll spend my whole life learning if I have to. Because when they took you, when I thought I might lose you forever, I realized you're not just the woman I swore to protect. You're the reason I want to live. You're the reason I want to be better. You're everything." Scarlet looked at him, the man all of New York feared, the man who'd killed 12 people in one night to save her, now kneeling by her hospital bed with wet eyes and an open heart, and she cried, tears sliding down her cheeks. Not the tears of pain she'd cried for 4 years with Derek, but the tears of happiness of a woman who'd finally found home. "Gabriel," she whispered, "you've been loving me all along. Every day you've been with me and Lily. Every night you've gotten up when she cried. Every morning you've eaten with us. Every time you've read her stories. Every time you've stood in the shadows watching over me to keep me safe. You've loved us with your actions, with your sacrifices, with your life. You just didn't know that was love." Gabriel looked up, and Scarlet leaned down and kissed him. Their first kiss, light as a butterfly's wing, gentle as spring wind, but carrying all the love they'd both been hiding for 3 years. 6 months later, on an ordinary Sunday morning in the Moretti estate kitchen, Gabriel proposed, not in a luxury restaurant or on a private yacht, but in the middle of flowers scattered everywhere while the three of them tried to make pancakes for breakfast. Lily, 4.5 with flour all over her face, was laughing because Gabriel flipped a pancake so badly it flew onto the ceiling. Scarlet was laughing too. Auburn hair messy, apron covered in flour and eggs, green eyes shining with happiness, and Gabriel suddenly knelt on the flour-covered kitchen floor holding a pear-shaped diamond ring he'd kept hidden in his pocket for 3 months, waiting for the right moment. "I want to wake up like this every day," he said softly. "Flour on our faces, pancakes on the ceiling," Lily laughing, "and you beside me, forever. Scarlet Hayes, will you marry me?" Scarlet cried and laughed at the same time and nodded over and over because she couldn't speak. "Yes, you idiot. Yes, 1,000,000 times yes." Lily jumped up cheering and sending flour flying everywhere. "Daddy's marrying Mommy, yay, can I be the flower girl?" The wedding took place 6 months later, in the garden of the Moretti estate beneath an arch of white and yellow roses, with only 50 close friends present. Scarlet wore a simple white dress, auburn hair loosely pinned with small flowers, holding a bouquet of yellow roses because they were her father's favorite. Lily, 5 years old, was the flower girl in a pale pink dress scattering petals with the seriousness of the most important mission of her life. And Gabriel, the most feared mafia boss in New York, stood at the end of the aisle in a black suit and silver tie, gray eyes wet as he watched Scarlet walk toward him, with Lily leading her in place of the father she'd lost. Harold Morrison read the final letter William had left for his daughter's wedding day, his low Scottish voice echoing through the rose garden. "My beloved daughter, if you're hearing this on your wedding day, it means you've found the one who deserves you. I can't be there to give you away. I can't hold you and tell you how proud I am, but I want you to know I knew Gabriel would be that man 20 years ago, when that 16-year-old boy was willing to die to protect his father. I chose him for you long ago, and I trust he'll love you the way you deserve to be loved. I love you. I'm proud of you, and I'll always be watching over you." Scarlet cried. Gabriel cried. The whole garden cried, and when they kissed beneath the roses, Lily cheered in her clear, bright voice, "Now I really have a daddy." 4 years had passed since the wedding in the rose garden, and the Moretti family was living in a happiness Scarlet had never dared to dream of. Lily was now 9 years old, a bright and thoughtful girl with long black hair tied in a ponytail, green eyes just like her mother's and grandfather's, and a strong yet gentle nature shaped by the 2 people who had raised her. Gabriel had officially adopted Lily, and she carried the Moretti name with a pride anyone could see. The family had also welcomed a new member, a 4-year-old son named Vincent Jr., named after Gabriel's most loyal guard, with black hair and gray eyes just like his father. The William Hayes Foundation had expanded its reach, helping more than 50,000 women and children across the United States, and Scarlet was even nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize for her contributions to the movement against domestic violence. Derek was still allowed to see Lily once a month according to the original agreement, and after many years he seemed to have truly changed. The arrogance and greed of the past were gone, and Derek was now a middle-aged man working part-time at an auto repair shop, living in a small apartment in Queens, and spending everything he had to buy gifts for his daughter each time he saw her. Gabriel never truly forgave Derek, but he had learned to accept his existence for Scarlet and for Lily. Then one October afternoon during the monthly meeting in Central Park, Derek suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed to the ground in front of Lily. An ambulance arrived within minutes, and Derek was taken to Lenox Hill Hospital in critical condition. Scarlet received the call and went to the hospital with Gabriel, while Vincent took Lily back to the estate. A doctor met them in the hallway, with a grave expression, and what he said felt like a blow to Scarlet's chest. "Stage 4 pancreatic cancer," the doctor said gently, "the same disease that had taken her father. Without treatment, he had about 4 to 6 months. With experimental treatment at the Mayo Clinic, it could extend for a few years, and might even go into remission. But the cost was very high, about $2 million, and his insurance wouldn't cover it. Derek had no money. He was unemployed most of the time, living on assistance and odd jobs, with no family willing to help. $2 million was unimaginable for him. That night, when Scarlet returned to the estate and told Lily about Derek's condition, the 9-year-old girl sobbed in her mother's arms. "Mommy," Lily cried with red tear-filled green eyes, "you have to save Daddy Derek. I don't want him to die. I know he did many bad things to you before, but he's changed. He always brings me candy. He tells me stories about Grandpa William. He says he's sorry he wasn't a good father. Mommy, please save him." Scarlet held her daughter tightly, not knowing what to say, her heart torn between a painful past and a complicated present. Gabriel stood in the doorway, hearing everything, his gray eyes darkening. After Lily fell asleep, Gabriel and Scarlett faced each other in the master bedroom, and for the first time in 5 years of marriage, they had a real argument. Gabriel paced like a caged beast, veins standing out, gray eyes burning with a fury Scarlett thought had long faded. "Absolutely not," Gabriel roared. "What did he do to you? He beat you for 4 years. He shoved you when you were pregnant with Lily. He almost killed both of you. And now you want to spend $2 million to save his life. Let him die. That's justice. That's karma." Scarlett sat on the bed, back straight, eyes steady on her husband, her voice strangely calm. "I know. I remember every moment. Sometimes I still dream about those beatings. Sometimes I still flinch when someone stands behind me. But this isn't about whether Derek deserves to be saved. This is about who I want to be. My father taught me that mercy isn't about the one who receives it. Mercy is about the one who gives it. And I don't want to live the rest of my life with hatred pressing on my chest." Gabriel stopped, gripping the window frame until his knuckles went white. "If you do this," he said, his voice trembling with conflict. "Scarlett, I've spent my whole life learning how to hate less. Don't make me." Scarlett stood, stepped behind him and wrapped her arms around his back, her cheek resting against his broad shoulder. "I'm not asking you to forgive him," she whispered. "I'm only asking you to trust me. Trust that I know what I'm doing." The next morning, while Scarlett was sitting alone in the rose garden where her father used to read in his final days, Harold Morrison appeared with an old yellow envelope faded by time. His face was more serious than usual as he sat across from her and placed it on her lap. "This is the last letter your father left for you," Harold said in his low Scottish voice, heavy with sorrow. "He titled it 'When Mercy Asks for Everything' and told me to give it to you only when you faced an impossible choice. I think this is that moment." Scarlett held the envelope with trembling hands, and when she opened it, her father's familiar handwriting appeared on the yellowed page, still unsteady but filled with the wisdom of a man who had lived, loved, forgiven, and died in peace. "My beloved daughter," William wrote, "if you're reading this, it means life is forcing you to face the hardest choice. Between revenge and forgiveness, between justice and mercy, between protecting yourself and helping the one who hurt you, I can't tell you what to do. Only you know what's right for you. But I can tell you this. Mercy has limits. Giving doesn't mean giving until you're destroyed. Protecting yourself is sacred too. If helping that person costs you yourself, your peace, your ability to love, then don't help. But if helping them makes you stronger, freer, lighter, then help. You deserve mercy too, from yourself. Don't ever forget that. Whatever you choose, I'm proud of you. Because you survived. Because you stood back up. Because you're my daughter." Scarlett stayed in the rose garden for an hour after Harold left, rereading the letter until its words settled into her heart, and she realized her father was right. Helping Derek wasn't about what he deserved. It was about her freedom, about living without carrying hatred for the rest of her life, about teaching Lily that mercy isn't weakness but the highest strength. That afternoon, Scarlett called Lenox Hill Hospital, where Derek lay waiting to die. "I'll pay for the treatment," she said calmly and clearly. "All of it. But this is the last time. After this, we're even." Derek cried on the phone in the broken sobs of a man who'd lost everything and never expected anything back. "Why?" he asked hoarsely. "I don't deserve it after everything I did to you." "You're right, you don't," Scarlett said. "But Lily deserves the chance to say goodbye properly if you don't make it. And I deserve to live without hatred for the rest of my life. Don't thank me, and don't apologize anymore. Just fight." For Lily, a month after Derek began treatment at the Mayo Clinic, Scarlett received a letter from a shelter in Brooklyn funded by the William Hayes Foundation, and she had to read the name 3 times before she believed it. Jessica Blake. "I know you don't want to hear from me," Jessica wrote in shaky handwriting, stripped of its old arrogance. "I won't blame you if you burn this letter. But I need to write. Not to ask forgiveness, but to say I finally understand." Jessica wrote about losing everything after the court scandal. Her job, her money, her family. 6 months on the street until winter nearly killed her under the Brooklyn Bridge. "This shelter saved my life," she wrote. "I eat. I sleep. I'm learning a new skill. I'm seeing a therapist. And last week I discovered this shelter is funded by the William Hayes Foundation. Your foundation. The woman I tried to destroy is the one keeping a roof over my head. I'm not asking forgiveness. I just want you to know karma is real. And sometimes karma isn't punishment but a lesson." Scarlett went to the shelter alone the next afternoon. Jessica sat in the common room, her once platinum hair now natural brown threaded with gray, her bare face thin and worn, aged at least 10 years since Scarlett last saw her screaming in the courthouse parking lot. Why are you here? Jessica asked, trembling. To see me miserable, to feel satisfied. Scarlett sat across from her and looked into the eyes of the woman who'd once been her enemy. To say I don't forgive you, Scarlett said calmly, without hatred or triumph. Not because you don't deserve it, but because forgiveness isn't something I can give like a gift. It has to be earned. But I can give you something else. Opportunity. This shelter has training and small business support. If you truly want to change and rebuild, the door is open, Jessica cried, mascara streaking her cheeks. Why are you kind to me after everything I did? Because my father taught me the best revenge is living so well the person who hurt you no longer matters, Scarlett said as she stood. You don't matter to me anymore, Jessica. You're just a woman who needs help in my shelter. And that's my freedom. Scarlett stepped out into the sunset and Gabriel stood by the black Bentley watching her with something she'd never seen before. You followed me, Scarlett said. Not a question. I know, Gabriel answered. I can't let you go alone, but I watched through the window. I saw you face her. And I'm learning to trust that you can protect yourself. Slowly. But I'm learning. And every day I watch you, I love you more than the day before. 2 years after Derek began treatment at the Mayo Clinic, the brutal pancreatic cancer finally won. The experimental therapy gave him 2 more years of life. 2 precious years, in which he watched his daughter grow, heard Lily's laughter once a month, and spoke the apologies he'd owed for so many years. Lily was 11 when Derek took his final breath in the hospital, and she held her biological father's hand in his last hours, saying goodbye properly the way Scarlett had wanted. Before he died, Derek looked at Scarlett standing at the foot of the bed, his blue eyes dim but still bright enough for her to see the gratitude in them. Thank you, he whispered, his voice no stronger than a breath of wind. Not just for the money, but for giving me the chance to be a father. Even a little, even too late. You're better than I ever deserved. 8 years later, on a clear autumn morning, Scarlett stood before her father's grave at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, holding a bouquet of fresh yellow roses. Lily, 19, stood beside her, almost as tall as her mother. Long black hair lifted by the autumn wind, green eyes bright like the grandfather she'd never met. The little girl was now a freshman at Columbia, studying social work and law, with the dream of taking over the William Hayes Foundation and expanding it nationwide. Gabriel had stepped away from most underworld activities, handed the empire to Vincent Russo, and moved into legitimate business in real estate, hotels, and technology. The family now had 3 more children, the 10-year-old twin girls Rose and Daisy with auburn hair like their mothers, and Vincent Jr., 14, who dreamed of becoming a doctor instead of following his father's path. Mommy, Lily said softly in the autumn air, do you think Grandpa is proud of us? Scarlett looked up at the blue sky with thin white clouds drifting by and smiled. I think he's sitting somewhere drinking coffee, smiling and saying, I told you so. That girl was stronger than she thought. I knew it from the beginning. Gabriel stood behind them, holding Rose's hand and Daisy's hand, while Vincent Jr. tried to look serious with his arms crossed. Gabriel's gray eyes met Scarlett's green eyes across William Hayes's grave, and in that look was everything they'd been through together. Pain, healing, love, and the promise to walk side by side until the end of their lives. My father once said, you'll never be alone. You'll never be poor. You'll never be weak. 15 years ago, when he said that on his hospital bed, I didn't believe him. I was a beaten woman, isolated, broken to the point I couldn't recognize myself in the mirror. I thought my life was over. But my father was right. He was always right. Not because of billions of dollars. Not because of Gabriel and his protection, but because I learned what he wanted to teach me all along. Real strength isn't in taking revenge on those who hurt you, but in building a life so good they become ghosts of the past with no power left to haunt you. Derek is gone. Forgiven, but not forgotten. Jessica is rebuilding her life in another city, and I'm here with my family, with my father's legacy, with a heart that's finally healed. Father, I understand now. True wealth isn't money or power, but love, mercy with boundaries, knowing when to fight and when to let go, having people willing to die for you and being willing to die for them. I love you forever, and I'll tell your great-grandchildren about the humble janitor who taught his daughter how to become a queen. The Moretti family walked out of the cemetery in golden autumn sunlight, Lily holding her mother's hand, Gabriel carrying Rose on his shoulders, Vincent Jr. guiding Daisy as she hopped beside him, their laughter echoing through the peaceful air. And this is the story of a woman who walked from hell into heaven, of a mafia boss who learned how to love, of mercy that proved stronger than revenge, and of a father who protected his daughter even after he was gone. The lesson this story wants to share is that sometimes the people who abandon us are giving our lives the greatest gift. that karma always finds its way to those who do wrong, that mercy isn't weakness but the highest form of strength, and that true family isn't blood but those who are willing to die for one another. If this story touched your heart, please subscribe to our channel. Like and share this video so others can hear it too. We'd love to know how you felt after hearing Scarlett and Gabriel's story. Whether you've ever had moments when life felt over and then you found light at the end of the tunnel. Whether you believe mercy is stronger than revenge. Leave a comment below and share what's in your heart. We read every message. We wish you good health, peace, and happiness every day. Thank you for watching until the very end. Goodbye, and see you in the next video.